welcome to our new guests. We're going to look a little ahead. The goal of today's panel is what will tomorrow's success look like, and we're going to be discussing kind of the future of AI and the opportunity for Telco. Hanno, good to see you again. I'll start with you as a CTO and a technologist. You work with Wavelo's customers to implement what Bob and others have been talking about, this EDA approach for our industry. What are you excited about? We've talked about getting excited and maybe a little worried about AI in the past. What are you excited about when you look to the future of AI specifically in this industry in telecom?
Well, there's obviously a lot to be excited about right now and scared. It depends a little bit what day it is, how I feel. So there's a lot of opportunities for us to really leverage AI in telecom. And because and sort of the speakers before me were talking about EDA, and obviously that's something that we are at Wavelo investing in. But it's not like that's new, right? So telecoms already live in an event-driven world.
Mm-hmm.
There's already state changes being propagated in a variety of different ways. So it's just that an EDA is a really good architecture to do that in real time, and that intersects really nicely with now, for example, the agentic world, right? So if you're looking at what a few years ago the trend of machine learning and doing big data analytics, um, those were offline processes that you didn't do in real time. You collect a bunch of data and you do your analytics on it, and then you can draw conclusions from them. But in a world where you have agents that need to act in real time, now all of a sudden that real time element becomes really important. And in a highly regulated environment, it's important that you can trace how you got to a certain decision, right or wrong, right? Um, so EDA is really good. Is a really good architecture that just fits that moment. And so I'm really excited about this combination of those two things. An AI operated world on top of an EDA, um, to create that backlog for and enable sort of an agentic workflow and real time changes. Um, there's a lot of opportunities to train a lot of these our own models as well. Um, the data that flows out of OSS and BSS systems are very rich. You can do a lot with them, and we've only, I think, touched sort of the surface layer. And from there, you can really drive that to make really good decisions and do that in a really auditable way as well, so that afterwards you can see how you got to a certain decision, right or wrong. Right.
So I'm going to push one of your buttons, if you don't mind.
I love that.
We've had some conversations about this, and that's around AI safety.
Yeah.
In the last panel, we talk about how you might have to push systems, maybe even break them to deliver some of these kind of use cases that we talked about. But I know you do worry a little about AI safety, especially when we start moving from near real time to real time. So when we think about maximizing AI in telecom operations, are we staying safe? What are you worried about?
I love this question. So please keep pushing the buttons.
Paul told me to scratch it out, but I kept it.
Yeah, good. So when did we talk? That was
Last year, yeah.
last year. So I don't remember exactly, but yeah. So consider how much has changed since when we talked and now. I'll give you an example from my own experience. Some of you may have heard of OpenClaw.
Yes.
Right? Agentic system. It's really exciting. I'm a hacker from the 90s, so I'm automatically a bit skeptical to have things give access to my data. So I ran it sort of in a sandbox environment, and very quickly you see that an agent can go haywire and so sort of do statistically the right thing and operationally completely the wrong thing. So I guess you could totally argue that given the context that you have, sort of probabilistically speaking, that's a completely reasonable thing to try and do. And then a little bit thing happens that is completely operationally completely wrong. So a good example was there was this AI researcher from Meta, I think, in the last week, who I'm sure I don't know if you've seen it, but she gave her agent access to her mailbox.
Yes.
And said like, hey agent, can you do some sorting for me and give me a recommendation on what I can maybe throw away? And she explicitly said, do not do anything until until I give the go ahead. Don't actually delete anything. Just give me a recommendation. And the end and sort of the reply from the agent was like, great, yes, I'm starting to delete all your emails. And so like, no, don't do that. So but the agent wasn't stopping. Right, she had to physically unplug and almost like diffuse a bomb. That story was like such a good example. So when I think about bringing it back to sort of the use cases that we use them for, you want to split the intelligence part, which is probabilistic, from the guardrails that are deterministic.
Yeah.
So, or if you want to sort of split the intelligence from the authority, if you will. Maybe that's a good way to say it.
So I'll kind of transition to Francis for a minute, and when we think about the history of let's call it legacy OSS BSS, and I know you, Patrick, John, you spent a lot of time there, and there will be people that might call OSS BSS as kind of boat anchors today, but in reality, that's the wrong way to think about them. So I'm going to ask you to say, all right, when you dream a little about looking ahead, in the context of AI, in the context of maybe some of these either safety concerns or the breaking barriers, opportunities. What do you think future-oriented AI-enabled OSS BSS looks like in your?
I think I start with actually what was on my key research topics at the moment. The the security aspects of it and the need to converge data that is typically currently totally separated in networks, and that it is separate in security applications, as it were, is one area. The other area is the whole data area, but specifically the digital twin, an evolving ecosystem of a digital twin. We certainly see the digital twin as being the sort of key capability that is going to be the difference between adopting AI with trust and not adopting AI, or AI being used in very limited use cases. You mentioned legacy. I think it's also important to say OSS and BSS, legacy OSS is like it is for a reason.
Right.
It's often because of security. It's often because of clarity of process roles, etc., etc. And most importantly, I'm sure many of you have heard of the term Conway's law. Systems replicate organizational structures, and in fact, in simplistically, a lot of the AI that is being implemented at the moment is AI on top of existing operational processes. But if we're to go beyond that one, and really the excitement of AI is actually its ability to do more, to perceive more, to do things quicker than human beings can't do there, and that's where data needs to be brought together, and often data in a way that we do not anticipate how you will bring those data. It's very easy to see the use cases based on the way we work at the moment. Take a very specific example. A lot of assurance problems are simply matters of capacity constraint, for example. And yet there's no interlinking between planning decisions and even financial decisions in that kind of area. We're never quite playing off do I operationally improve assurance by actually spending some more capex, for example, in planning, for example. That might be a possible scenario in a situation, and there may be many more than that one. And what that does require is that it doesn't require all of the data, but it requires the ability to have the data in the right point to make decisions. And the final point I'll make about that one is decisions, I think, is the key word here. John, my colleague, mentioned it earlier. The data is there to make decisions, whether it's an AI or it's a human. And we're actually quite bad at recording what the results of our decisions.
Mhm.
Some decisions matter. Some decisions actually can bring the network down. And if you're trusting an AI agent to do that, that becomes very important. So a key part of our research at the moment is also looking at how data enables us to make decisions, make better decisions, but to rationalize, improve decision making, improve data accuracy as it's needed to the business need of making decisions. So I hope I answered your question there.
You did, and it leads into a question of Sandro. I mean, freeing this data is so important, but the Bellevue example with AT&T, that's a use of freed data, right?
Yes.
And so when you think about how you're working with clients in the labs, proofs of concepts, or even in the field, um, are you excited about that free data and what we'll call truly agentic AI systems? You talk a lot.
Oh, absolutely. It's actually part of the entire process when we're working with a customer AI system, right? So, the Bellevue example is like it was a wealth of data that was simply untapped,
Yeah.
and they were generating terabytes of data every day. And yeah, I mean, if there was like probably some runaway vehicle and so on, they would tap into that to figure out where it went, but they were not doing much else with that. So you took that data and actually turned into something that generates real value to a customer. Same thing happens like in the telecom world. There's as you pointed out, Hanu, tons of data laying on OSS, BSS systems. The moment we move that to a layer that actually can enable these to be utilized to, for example, get a better grasp of what my customer experience is, or really like find ways to, sell more to these customers, tailor offers to enterprises. So this is all extremely valuable. When we're addressing like an AI opportunity, we can call this day or potential AI customer, this is actually one of the very first things we look at. I had even this week here more than once customers approaching us at the booth and saying, "Hey, yeah, we actually have to invest in and we have to buy AI servers." The expectations are we're going to start pitching, "Yeah, we have XE 9780." So the question back is like, "Okay, for what?" And some of them get a little bit startled. I mean, I was like, "Okay, why are you asking me that?" Uh, but that's a very important question, right? Because the last thing we want is to start pushing a ton of equipment to a customer and then having them calling us back in 3 months complaining that we oversold them, right? So understanding actually, okay, what are they looking to achieve? What are their data sources? What are they doing with this data right now? Where is this data? How do we consolidate that into a data lake that can be tapped into the applications, and then getting into the infrastructure architecture is the right way to do. And honestly, is a way for us to differentiate ourselves as well from some other competitors that are more focused on pushing boxes. We believe that, of course, the boxes are important. These are bread and butter. But if you don't strategize, if you're not pragmatic, as I mentioned in the previous panel, you're not really getting much out of it, right? Then you may generate frustration.
Do, are customers asking the right questions on how to scale this? So again, let's take the Bellevue example or similar lab-based examples. You get it right, you're delivering it, you're stopping traffic when it's supposed to, you're saving lives, but that's a microcosm.
Yeah.
What are the questions the customer should be asking about how to do this at scale? Any thoughts on that?
Well, it's really about, first of all, defining, taking a step back, right? This is all a process of transformation.
Yep.
Of course, I deal much more with the telecom companies. And, we see all this data available. We see everything that technology can do. I'm not concerned about that. My biggest concern is like, what are the business outcomes that are actually driving all this discussion? So yeah, in most of the cases, no, the right questions are not being asked, right? In a lot of cases, we actually have to drive the discussion towards, yeah, I mean, you want to deploy AI, why? Right. So what are you planning to do with that? And then we'll get to the right track about, okay, on the telecom world, well, to actually leverage AI, there's a ton of other steps you need to take to actually adjust your processes. adjust how you deal with your data, how you innovate, how fast you are to launch new services. So you're actually able to see the benefit out of these, right? So it is a transformational discussion in the telecom world, and it is a transformational discussion in pretty much every vertical we touch, right? So once again, being pragmatic, having a purpose is extremely important.
Yes. So, Hanno, I'll pick on you again if you don't mind. When we chatted last, you talked about being away from telecom and then coming back, and your first reaction is, "What's wrong? Why aren't they taking advantage of tools like EDA to kind of accelerate the stuff you maybe would see at a Netflix or a Walmart?" But now you have a little bit more context. So if you want to if you were to be asked to provide advice to a future-oriented CIO today, or someone who's running these systems, what would you tell them now that you've been on both sides, the kind of enterprise and back in the telco side of how would you maximize a tool or a connectivity tool like EDA or similar stuff to enable the data to kind of achieve some of those AI ambitions? What would that advice look like?
So it's actually related to the previous question as well. They're coming at this the same topic, which is that it's really hard to ask the right questions if you don't have the right words.
Yeah.
Because language constrains how you talk about it or how clearly you can express that, right? And so now we're back to semantics, and that's semantic standardization. And but to answer your question first, like a future-oriented CIO, I would definitely say treat EDA not as sort of dumb infrastructure. Treat it more like strategic infrastructure, if you will.
Right.
But it needs to be well thought through, and that means that beforehand you want to be very clear about what things mean, some sort of semantic standardization layer, and that allows you to get a clear view of what the state of your system is across maybe, I don't know, dozens of systems that all produce their own data, that have their own databases, etc. Right. So I'll give you a very simple example. Like when people talk about activation, that it's not the same thing. It depends on what network you use, what you're selling. Like, there's not really a good standard view of that. And the processes that you need to run when somebody's activation are very different. So, and if you don't clarify that up front, what you mean by those things, you're not only generating technical debt in the sense that your code is getting crummy, but you're actually also creating semantic debt, if you will, right? That sort of prevents you from clearly understanding and talking about what it is that you're trying to achieve.
Poor frameworks, poor ontology mean poor use of data.
And poor outcomes, ultimately, yeah.
Okay. So going back to the future a little bit, and I'll ask this of all of you, but I'll start with Francis. So if we get back together in 2 or 3 years here at MWC, and we're congratulating ourselves that we've solved a lot of the data connectivity, we have solid ontology, we have great frameworks. What does success look like? How are we successfully extracting AI to extracting data to deliver AI? Is this a win in 2 or 3 years, or what does it feel like? And you can do it from the perspective, especially from OSS BSS systems. As much as we pick on, they're so essential to what we need to get to AI.
I think one of the things about AI is to realize in what it can do, it's completely transformation. But in terms of organization, we haven't radically changed.
Yep.
And one of the issues of new technology like EDA, for example, is that it's seen as you're talking to groups that have seen 6 transformation projects fail, big transformation, lots of money or whatever. I think most important thing that is going to is twofold. One of which is actually going to be quick wins, not trying to actually boil the ocean, as it were, in terms of what it can do. Looking at areas where the combination of real-time data and AI intelligence can deliver business benefits, because a lot of the people you're selling to, the average time in a job is about 2 years. Everybody who's signing up to this needs to get the benefit within those 2 years. Otherwise, it kind of floats. But the other thing I think that is really important is to have those use cases or those ideas of those use cases that go beyond AI on top of the existing process. I talked about it earlier, the convergence of, for example, network operations and security operations. Can I put intelligence into that information that is coming from security sources, information that's coming from the network, for example? Can I combine that in a way that is innovative and delivers a real benefit, particularly in an environment where the whole security situation is actually being driven sort of crazy by AI itself being a security threat?
So in 2 years, we will, on some of those use cases, you think we'll be congratulating ourselves. Okay. So, Sandro, same question. If we're meet again in 2 years, will we be slapping each other on the back and say with some real important cases, we freed the data, we drove agentic AI in telecom? Or are you slightly more skeptical? Or
I'll slice your question in two different slices, right? So from a technology perspective, I'm pretty convinced that yes, right? So I'm not concerned about technology. I'm not concerned about how we can technically free the data and make sure it's available and have all the systems that we need to actually proper treat it and generate insights and results out of this data. In the telecom world, the point that concerns me the most is the business environment around it.
Mhm.
How do you actually transform all of this technology into business, right? Into revenue? There's going to be a ton of pressure in this industry, right? So we need to provide the connectivity. We need to be able to allow all these systems to function. Everything is going to run in these networks, right? So and that generates, of course, a lot of pressure in investments. And this industry has had some other examples of situations similar to that in the recent past. And we can't do things in the same way.
Right.
It is as simple as that. So there is a significant need for transformation, of course, in the architecture of the network, because we're going to have to be more agile, but really on how the business is structured. So the industry has to learn to sell more than connectivity, even though I know that Patrick doesn't necessarily agree with me on that one. There he is. I am convinced that yes, connectivity is important and that's their bread and butter. But like, if they are to reap all the benefits out of this transition,
Right.
and really take their business to the next level, where by the way their shareholders expect them to be, they will need to transform how they do business, right? And that is the part that concerns me a little bit. And I'm not that convinced that we're going to get there in 2 years. I surely hope so. And we're doing everything in our power to make that happen. But yes, I mean, we need to get to this common point that there needs to be action happening in this realm.
So, Hannah, I'll ask you the same question, a little bit more context. Justin this morning mentioned that the investor feels there's inefficiencies in telecom. We heard Christoph and Kearney talk about, hey, especially here in Europe, there's some health issues with the weight of EBITDA and some other issues. In that context, 2 years from now, we're getting back together and we are patting ourselves on the back with our data-driven AI success. Can you give some context of where you think those wins will come?
Well,
in your
first of all,
product?
I think any answer that I'm going to give right now is going to have enormous error bars around it.
Yeah.
Right. So the confidence level is not very, like, because things are changing so fast.
Yes,
Right. So that said,
agreed.
I think we're doing a lot of foundational things that you need to do that you can just see are going to be beneficial regardless of sort of we get to AGI or things sort of stay the same, or everybody is really embracing real agentic systems in telco, or people take a more slower approach. I ultimately think that it's not going to be these the actual development over the next few years is not going to be gated by how fast technology moves, but how fast organizations can move.
Yeah.
Right. So, but I think they were trending in the right direction. It is a forcing function, and I think I like to believe that we'll be better off in 2 years. But I'm an optimist as well. So
I had one other question before I ask. I'll just see if there are any other questions for our future-oriented discussion here from the audience. Please. Oh, uh-oh.
You're wrong.
We, coming off the first panel, Matt, we had a lot of discussions this week around sovereign AI. I would be interested in, you guys kind of framing it up, pros and cons, and potential opportunities or barriers to the telecommunication operators.
Yeah, if I could put just a little bit of spin on that, and I'll start with Sandro, because again, internationally, you have projects in so many different markets. Is that a hindrance or an accelerator for some of the stuff we talk about today? Sorry for your question.
It's an accelerator. It is certainly a driver, especially as we look into service providers in Europe, Asia. In the US, probably not as much, because the hyperscalers are sovereign by definition there, right? But like in other countries, there is a pretty significant push. It comes with the same challenges, right? So it is a hefty investment. Some countries are looking into ways of incentivizing this investment and helping a little bit. But then the question is, okay, how do I make it make sense for the operator business, right? So are they going to sell compute capacity by the pound the same way that it's being sold? They're selling connectivity. So what is the model, and what do they need to do to actually become players in this world? We are working with partners again to provide options and solutions to our customers that are embarking on this journey. But yeah, once again, regardless of the technology solution, there is a need for change in processes, in organizational culture, so they can really reap the benefits out of these opportunities that is being basically given to them.
Yeah, so Hannah, if you put your kind of EDA lens on, does Patrick's question matter? When you think about sovereign, wherever we're freeing the data from, wherever it's held, do you care to enable some of the kind of agentic AI that we hope EDA?
Well, I do care. Some of the technology inherently has advantages when you want to do data sovereignty, because you're able to not store everything in one bucket. If it's a data stream, think about it as, a river can have branches, and you can branch things off and store certain types of data and force them to be only processed in a certain geographic region or by certain types of software.
Right.
So it gives opportunities. I think it's a positive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Another comment?
I think one of the things about digital sovereignty is to realize it's not just one thing. Much like actually the real world of sovereignty, as we can see at the moment. The nature of that sovereignty will change depending on the use case. I think one of the problems about sovereignty is it immediately conjures up a view of a sort of castle wall with a moat around it, and we're all okay inside and all the rest of it. And that's not the reality of it. There will be important things. Recently, I was talking to somebody from working in the German healthcare system, and you can have the best EU completely surrounded cloud, but nobody's using it because it's too expensive compared to other things. So there will be a mix and match of things. There will be compute capability, network capability that needs to be sovereign. There will be other aspects where you may want to make the application sovereign, but in fact the underlying infrastructure completely neutral toward whatever it is. I think it will very much depend on the actual needs. Telcos have a great advantage here in that they can play at the physical level of, we've got sovereign in-country capability, but they can also play a lot in terms of maybe secure containers, a lot of the operational processes that sit around it, or the control of data that is there, they have options to be playing in that kind of area. When the data is at rest, when it's in transit, they've got options to play in that area. So I think put that all together, and maybe that's a great opportunity for the telco tied to a particular country or particular region.
Okay, great. I want to make sure I'm not missing any other questions.
Can I respond to that? So the sovereignty, because you asked specifically about EDA, but the sovereignty part on the physical side, where you have data centers. So luckily, a lot of these software layers are open source, so they can be deployed, and people are. Shameless plug to the Two Cows data center team. We've been running our own data centers for decades at this point. Right. So we are completely independent. We don't run on. We can deploy into cloud, because a lot of the deployment mechanisms, if you run Kubernetes or Nomad HashiCorp or any of the other sort of container-based microservices, a modern application stack is already kind of out of the box, sort of multi-cloud able or cloud agnostic, if you will. So if you can solve for making sure that the physical layer is sovereign, like your data center itself, data storage, and then the software layers on top of them are sovereign. So which means you don't run the applications made by some of the maybe giants that are not, whose incentives are not maybe always aligned, or you don't fully trust. And then you're making sure that the pipelines to and from the networks are secure. I think all the pieces are there.
Right.
Yeah.
So I want to thank Hanno, Sandro, and Francis for closing us out. A little look in the future, and I think some optimism. So we'll take it. And thank all of you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you so much for hosting.